Hi, so today I wanted to briefly discuss indentured servitude in some of your ancestors. So, indentured servants. Historians say that as many as 1/2 to 2/3 of the colonists that came over to America in the 17th century were indentured servants. Indentured servants, it's called indentured servants based on the type of contract it was. There was a contract where in the beginning how it worked is they would write it out in duplicate on one piece of paper, and then they would rip it, and the edge of it would be really jagged or toothed, and this would be the indentured part of it. It had a jagged edge to it, and the owner of that contract would have one half and the servant would have the other half, and those could be put together to show that they were made at the same time. So that's where the name comes from, the indenture part of the name. Indentured servants coming to America, you could be indentured to, the contract could be made out to the captain. You could sign up for to be an indentured servant to get transport to the colonies, which is what a lot of people did. They actually had agents. There were recruiting agents working in London, say, that would sell these contracts. They would get a percentage for however many contracts they could sell. So a lot of people came over as indentured servants, and in fact, there were a lot of civil wars. There was a lot of civil war going on in England at the time, and when they would win these, whoever would win whichever side of the battle, the soldiers that were captured on the losing end, they would often be sold as indentured servants over to America. So this gets really delicious because what happens is England ends up taking a lot of the rabble rousers, the troublemakers, the people they defeat in war, and they end up selling them as indentured servants, ship them over to America to get rid of them. And these people would later, this is the blood that would later be responsible for the American Revolution, because, you've got this blood of rebellion running through their veins. They're already, probably bitter. So many of them are already probably bitter over British rule. And then they're going to come to America where the Brits sent them to get rid of them, and then they're going to make a new home. So I just think that's wonderful. So one of your ancestors is Cyprian Prou. Now, Cyprian Prou was born 1663 in France, and he is a French Huguenot. Now, he is actually, you are eligible for, if you're interested at all, you are eligible for entry into the National Huguenot Society. Cyprian Prou is one of the lines that's registered at the National Huguenot Society. If you're interested. So Cyprian Prou and Margaret Prou, his wife, they both immigrate to America in 1684. So he's 21 at the time. And if you look at the contract, he signs his name. She just marks it with an X. So their term of indentured servitude is only 4 years, which is unusual because most of the contracts were 7 years or more. So theirs is only 4 years. And in it has an exception, working in the ground accepted, which is another unusual thing. So this kind of tells us that they must have been educated or have we know they're educated because he can write at the time, and maybe he had some sort of skill that would allow him to work in some other trade. But basically they were skilled enough or educated enough to cut better terms, that they didn't have to work in the fields. So by 1696, this is just 8 years after the end of his indentured servitude, Cyprian Prou holds the post of constable in Richmond, Virginia. This just goes to show you that, it was quite common to be an indentured servant and that you could make something of yourself after it was over. By 1699, he's got his own indentured servant. We see a contract where he's got his own indentured servant. So he ends up dying in Virginia in 1712. Leads leads a decent life. Now, there's another, on the other end of this spectrum is Andrew Woodley, another of your ancestors. So he was born in 1650. He's a Brit, and he is a sea captain. So this is the other end of it. He probably had quite a few indentured servants, and this would, and these contracts were transferable. So, you know, he would sign a bunch of contracts with a bunch of people who wanted to come to the colonies, and then he would take those contracts and he could either keep them for himself and they could work the land or work his property because he was a planter, or he could just sell them. He could sell these contracts. So he was a sea captain, a surveyor, a planter, and a sheriff. And his line, the Woodley line, and he married a woman named Elizabeth Goddard. The Goddard line, the Woodley line, they both came through Barbados. So there are a lot of, you know, you can see that he makes a lot of trips back and forth to Barbados, England, Barbados, you know, America. So he ends up marrying his wife Elizabeth Goddard in Barbados. Most of the Woodleys and the Goddards end up making the move over to Isle of Wight, Virginia, which is where Andrew Woodley would eventually settle. Another one of your ancestors who came over, and we thought he was going to be an indentured servant. You know, you would have thought so, but so there were 3 brothers, all sons of Thomas Dulaney. The Dulaneys were Irish. They were not Scotch-Irish. These guys were full-blood Irishmen. The Dulaney family, it tracks back to the O'Dulaney clan of Ireland, which is a prominent clan in Ireland, and an educated one. So all of these brothers that come over in 1703, there are 3 brothers, Joseph, Daniel, and William. All of them come in 1703, and all of them are obviously educated. So they're bound in articles. This is where it gets interesting. So they're bound in articles of redemption to the captain of the ship that brought them over. And this captain would normally, they can do what they want with these articles of redemption. So he could have sold them into indentured servitude. Whatever happens, these guys don't end up becoming indentured servants. So I don't know if maybe they worked the ship on the travel over. I don't know, maybe they cut some sort of deal, but they arrive in Maryland and they don't become indentured servants. So, and as we know, Maryland at that time was settled by a lot, it was kind of the place where a lot of Catholic aristocracy would go. So they were probably part of this Catholic move. So these 3 brothers, one of them, William, becomes a teacher. Daniel ends up studying law and becoming a lawyer. And Joseph, your ancestor, obtains an apprenticeship in a local doctor's office there. And then he eventually becomes a doctor. But it's interesting because his brother Daniel, the one who's the lawyer, he ends up being quite the land speculator. And by the time Daniel dies, he has 15 to 20,000 acres in Maryland, acres of property, and he gives a bunch of it to his son, Daniel Jr. And that land that he had given to his son ends up getting confiscated after the American Revolution, which tells me that they were Tories. So they must have been Tory loyalists because their land was taken, and that land that he had given to his son that used to that was owned by him would later, it's now the location of the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. That was land owned by Daniel Dulaney. So anyway, but his brother Joseph, your ancestor, heads over to Virginia, and the Dulaneys are a prominent colonial family in Virginia. And Dr. Joseph Dulaney and his wife end up having like 9 kids. This is why these families are so large and there are so many descendants, because he and his wife had 9 kids. I'm sure William and Daniel also had a lot of kids. Thomas, their father, ends up immigrating over to America 5 years after his sons do. Okay.